Hello. This is going to be a brief overview of just all the major parts of the brain. I'm going to be going over the main brain structures. We're going to touch on the midbrain. I'm also going to do just a little bit of the arteries, and time permitting, we can also do the cranial nerves. I know there's kind of a lot of subjects on just the brain, but it's meant to be more of an overview of just all the different areas in the brain. So nothing super in depth. I'll try and keep it simple. And we'll start right here. So this is the outside structure of the brain. This is the anterior portion. This is the posterior portion. Okay. Now it's separated into different lobes. Okay. You have your frontal lobe right here. You have your parietal lobe. As you can see, it kind of goes along with the names of the structures of the skull. The temporal lobe. Okay, and then back here we have our occipital lobe. Don't mind the color differences. It's just, actually I think this is part of two different models. But just imagine that these colors are also over on this side as well. Okay, I'm not going to go into what each lobe does specifically. There's too many things, okay, for each lobe to do that. So this is just going to be more the anatomy. Okay, this side highlights some differences. Actually, maybe it does belong to this, and it's just the difference between the lobes and these sections. Okay, so this red strip right here, which actually goes clear down, is the prefrontal cortex, okay? And this is also called the motor cortex. This is all the signals for your brain to send out to move your body, move your muscles. This is the postcentral cortex, okay, or postcentral gyrus. And that is your sensory. So information that's coming from, you step on a nail, the pain sensors, okay, it comes up here, okay, it senses everything, or just your vision and smell and things like that. Okay, these two sections right here have to do with speech. This is called the Wernicke's area, or if you're going to be correct and say it in German, which the word is the V, Wernicke's area, and this is Broca's area, okay. Those have to do with speech. I actually don't recall at the top of my head which one is which, but one of them is about interpreting the words and one is speaking. If I remember correctly, Broca's area is the motor function of speech and being able to actually use your mouth to talk. And then Wernicke's area is more sound interpretation and interpreting language. Okay, and then we have this structure that's kind of underneath in the back. That's the cerebellum. The cerebellum is mostly responsible for balance. Let me see. So actually, it's interesting. If you drink a lot of alcohol, you have a hard time balancing. That's why the police officer asks you to do certain walking tests to see if you're intoxicated, because the cerebellum picks up that alcohol and affects your balance. All right, just a moment here. Trying to figure out a way to hold this up good. Let's turn this around. Okay. And so there's actually another lobe that you can't see called the insula, and you would lift the temporal lobe up, and then it would be just on the inside of that, which you might be able to see. Yeah, not really. I don't think it has it. But you can't see that on the outside of the brain. It's going to be on the inside. Okay. Okay, well, since I'm right here, maybe I will just go over the cranial nerves so I can keep going on this same thing. There are 12 cranial nerves that connect to the brain. This big one here is the olfactory nerve. That has to do with smell. This one here is the optic nerve, okay, for your vision. And cranial nerve 3 is your oculomotor, which is right here. There it is. Okay. Oculomotor, just on top of the pons. This whole area is the pons. Okay. So oculomotor nerve, that's eye movement. Nerve 4 is around the back side here. That's the trochlear nerve. That moves one of the eye muscles. This is the trigeminal nerve, okay? As I'm going, these are in order of Roman numerals. So this would be cranial nerve 5, the trigeminal nerve. And there are 3 nerves that come off of that work with the face, the ophthalmic region, the maxillary region, and the mandibular region. Cranial nerve 6 is the abducens. Okay, that also moves an eye muscle. Cranial nerve 7 is the facial muscle. It's for facial expression. Cranial nerve 8, vestibulocochlear nerve. Okay, that has to do with your hearing. Cranial nerve 9, which actually doesn't really show it on here, so it's written in, is your glossopharyngeal nerve. That's the muscles in the back of your throat, and also the posterior 1/3 of your tongue. Let's see, or excuse me, actually, I think that's the anterior 2/3, but don't quote me on that. I can't remember which one's which. This 10 here is the vagus nerve. This goes down, clear down to your digestive system. It does a lot of work with your autonomic nervous system. It's a big sucker. 11 is the accessory spinal nerve. Okay, that works with your some of your muscles in your upper back and your sternocleidomastoid, I believe. And cranial nerve 12 is your hypoglossal. Okay, so underneath the tongue. Now that I am thinking about a hypoglossal, I think that this is the 1/3. Okay, 1/3 of the tongue, the posterior. So yeah, those are the cranial nerves. And let's get off to this model over here. You can kind of see some of these nerves on this one also. So, well, all right, let's do a lot of these vessels here since they're right in the front. Let's turn this around. So all of the arteries that are coming out up here and also out of here, I didn't say this. So this section between the hemispheres is what's called the longitudinal fissure. Okay. And also between the pre and post-central gyrus, you have the central sulcus. Okay. Also, all of the grooves, those are called sulci, or sulcus if it's singular. And the projections, the lobular projections that are sticking out everywhere are the gyrus, or gyri for multiple. Okay. So you have your anterior cerebral arteries in the front. They also come out of this fissure. Then you have the middle cerebral arteries that are coming out of this fissure. Okay, this is called the longitudinal fissure. Just separates the temporal lobe from the parietal and frontal lobe. And then you have your posterior cerebral arteries in the back. Then, if we come over here, we're not going to be able to see everything on this because it's cut. But I'll try and explain as best I can. All right, so this is coming up through the foramen magnum in the skull, that big hole, okay? And then these big ones right here onto the side, these are your vertebral arteries, okay? So they're going through the transverse processes of the different, what's the word I'm looking for? Through the spinal column, okay? Not the cord, but this, your vertebrae. Gosh, I couldn't remember the word. The transverse foramen, there's holes on the sides of those bones, and these go up through those and then connect to here. So vertebral arteries. Then they kind of connect and come in right here. This is your anterior spinal artery. Obviously, the name implies it's on the front of the spine. Then these ones that coming off are your posterior inferior cerebellar arteries. Okay. And then this up here is your anterior inferior cerebellar arteries. Good way, acronyms are always nice. Okay, PICA, ICA. Okay. Then you have a bunch of little ones here. These are called your pontine arteries. Okay. And then this one here is your superior cerebellar artery. And then at this point, we start naming cerebral arteries instead of cerebellar. So in case you forgot, this is the cerebellum. Okay, and then if we're talking about cerebral, we're talking about this structure. So this part's actually supposed to go into a circle that goes clear around here. It's called the circle of Willis. But it's got cuts here so you can see down inside there instead. But so imagine this being a circle. So this would be the posterior cerebral artery, okay? Again, so let's see. Yeah, that's right, posterior cerebral artery. And then if this wasn't cut right here, there would be an artery connecting here to here, and that's the posterior communicating artery. Okay, so it's just that section of the circle that's missing. And it actually would come about right here. Okay, so that would be a section of this here and here. So this would just be section 1 of the posterior cerebral artery, and then section 2. Okay, and then the communicating artery here. So, and then this artery here is the middle cerebral artery, goes up through here. Remember, it comes out of this fissure here. And that actually stems from the internal carotid artery, which comes up and then it hits the circle of Willis and then goes out from the circle of Willis and becomes the middle cerebral artery. And then if you can see it, this section up here of the circle of Willis, this is going to be your anterior cerebral artery. So it's going to be here, and it's also going to project upwards. And all of it's the anterior cerebral artery. Now you can't see it on here because it's right where the split is, but there is a little section of artery that completes that circle of Willis, and that's the anterior communicating artery. So you have an anterior and a posterior communicating artery. Okay. All right, let me think for a moment, see if I'm missing anything important. Okay, I think those are the important ones. Okay, obviously anatomy can get into so much depth. Okay, there's a lot more to it than that, but we'll keep it simple. Okay, I am going to see if I can try and get a midbrain here. Bear with me. Okay, so if we were to cut the brain mid-sagittal, we would kind of see this type of structure. Just really quick before I begin, silver areas, those are just the pin, so try your best to ignore those. Again, just so we have our bearings, this is the anterior portion, the posterior portion. You can always tell if it's posterior because it's got the cerebellum on that side. Okay, so let's see. These are your lobes up here. This part right here looks like just one long gyrus here, okay? That's your cingulate gyrus, okay? Just runs all the way down there. Cingulate gyrus, okay? And then you have the cingulate sulcus right here. Again, if it's inside of the cerebral area, it's a sulcus, okay? Except for the really big one running down both hemispheres because it's so large, we refer to that as a fissure, longitudinal fissure. So, and then this part right here is your corpus callosum. Okay, those are just nerve fibers that connect your left and right hemispheres together. Okay, so if you were to take the brain out, you would have to cut through this section. Let's see, this section right here is called the body of fornix. Okay, it's kind of hard to describe the body of fornix, but basically what it does is it connects the mammillary body, which is actually right here, and it connects it to the hippocampus, which actually doesn't really show here. And let me see if I can kind of look sideways to describe how they connect. So the body of fornix is here, and it actually kind of goes outwards to connect to the mammillary gland, mammillary body, and then it will come out and then out this way to connect to the hippocampus. So we can't really see those projections. This part right here is the choroid plexus. Okay, the choroid plexus is where the cerebrospinal fluid comes from. And it comes into a ventricle. So you have different ventricles. In this area, just deep to here and also towards us are lateral ventricles. Okay, so ventricles 1 and 2. And there's also choroid plexus in those. This is the third choroid plexus. So the spinal fluid also is up in the fourth, and it will come down and it will, through what's called the cerebral aqueduct, which doesn't show it here, okay, but it will go into the third ventricle, which is here, also has a choroid plexus, okay. Excuse me, I can't, interventricular, I actually believe this is the interventricular aqueduct, and this is the cerebral aqueduct. Don't quote me on that. It's kind of escaping me at this time, but one is the cerebral aqueduct and one is the interventricular. All right, so we'll have to look at that. And then down here, in this area here will be your fourth ventricle. Okay, so again, ventricles are just areas where you have a choroid plexus and it's putting out cerebrospinal fluid, and that will go from there into the subarachnoid space in the meningeal layers. And from there, it will go into the sinuses through what's called arachnoid granulations. And then from the sinuses, it will go into veins and then ultimately back to the heart again. So a lot of those structures that I'm mentioning right there, it doesn't show it on here, like the arachnoid granulations and the sinuses. Okay. This right here is called the pineal body. It's also a gland. They call it body or gland, okay, and that's responsible for melatonin secretion, okay, for helping you to sleep. This area coming down here is where the optic chiasm is, okay, so that's where your optic nerves are going to be connecting, okay, and then underneath, which doesn't really, maybe slightly shows where it is, but not much. That's where your pituitary gland is going to be. Okay, pituitary gland, tons of functions, different hormones that it puts out for the whole body. This area right inside here is called the hypothalamus. So hypo under the thalamus, so obviously above it should be the thalamus, right? And it is. You can kind of see this indentation here is the beginning of it. It kind of goes around here. This whole area, the thalamus. Now this is actually, we're looking straight down from a perfect cut midbrain. So this is actually the surface of the thalamus. And you actually have a thin layer that separates both right here, and it's called the septum pellucidum. And then you'd have your left thalamus, you know, towards us, obviously. And then you have your thalamic adhesion point. Okay, this is basically just a structure that connects both of the thalamuses, okay? And then, let's see, what am I missing? This is the pons. Okay, the pons has to do a lot with your heart rate, heartbeat, and also breathing regulation. This is your medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata. Okay. Let me think for a minute, see if I'm missing anything. All right, you can't really see it here, but it's probably worth mentioning really quick, the meningeal layers, okay? There are 3 meningeal layers that go on top of the brain. The layer that sticks to the brain is called the pia mater. It will fit like right with every groove of the brain, okay? Extremely thin layer. And then you have your arachnoid layer, okay? So under the arachnoid layer is where the cerebrospinal fluid is. It's kind of like spider web projections everywhere, hence arachnoid. And then you have your dural mater, which is on top. It's a very thick, leathery material. If you get a chance to look at a cadaver, you can't miss it. It's really obvious. Okay. And then I had mentioned sinuses. The sinuses are actually in between 2 layers of the dura mater. Let's see, what are they at the top of my head? The paraosteal layer and the meningeal layer. Okay, and it will run between those. All right, let's see. I think that's it. I just wanted to give a really brief overview of all of the major parts that you would probably be tested on. Actually, I just remembered a couple more things. They're a little bit tinier, but let me just go over them anyways. Okay, this right here is the anterior commissure, and then you also have the posterior commissure, which is actually just behind the pineal gland. You can't really see it on here. And then you have these bulbs here. Now, on an actual brain, there'll be 4 because this is just 1/2, but you have your superior colliculus and your posterior colliculus. Or, excuse me, inferior colliculus. Okay, superior, inferior. And they are responsible for helping you to move your head and to bring your attention to sounds that you might hear or something that you see. Okay, superior, inferior, colliculus. So again, I think those are all the major points. Again, this is a pretty complicated subject. There's a lot more in depth that you can really look at this, but I hope this kind of gives you a general overview of everything. Thank you for listening.